Yo, how's it going? So today I want to talk about the 4 lessons I learned being in a room full of 7 to 8 figure entrepreneurs. Some of these people were making upwards of $1 million a year, maybe up to $10 million a year, if not more. We were talking about things like trust, business structures, all that sort of fun stuff. So just to kind of goes to show what kind of conversations we're having. But this video isn't going to be anything about like scaling businesses. It's not going to be talking about like tactics or anything like that. It's going to be touching on principles that make life and business better. Because as soon as you take care of the principles, then everything is going to just start working. When you focus on tactics, things just kind of start to break down. And that's actually one of the things I'm going to touch on later. But to start with, the first lesson that I learned is that energy is way more important than time, and that time doesn't really matter if you don't have the energy. So the energy that you have dictates how you use the time. Everybody has the same 24 hours a day, but people get things done differently. Some of the highest performing people out there get way more done in the same time that we all have allotted because they have their energy dialed in. When you think of someone that's depressed, super low energy. They can't really get out of bed. They don't really do much. And even if when they do something, it's not the greatest performance. They're slow to get things done. They might have brain fog. They might just not be able to get through the day without any stressors, without any cognitive issues. So when you compare that to like a high performing entrepreneur, someone that maybe takes care of their body, that has proper nutrition, that hydrates themselves properly, that gets some sunlight in their eyes, that takes care of their spiritual health, their mental health, they're able to operate at a much higher level. So that's what you have to kind of keep in mind, is that less time, if you have less time but more energy, you're actually way more productive. It is much better to work 3 hours in a day where your energy is super high rather than work an 8-hour day where you're at like 20% capacity, because you're going to get so much more done in less time with more energy than you do with more energy or with less time or less energy and more time. So that's the biggest thing that I realized, is that that's what productivity is really all about. It doesn't matter what sort of tactics you use. It doesn't matter how much discipline you or willpower you use to get started. If you're lacking in energy, then you're just not going to get as much done. Now, the solution to this is, like I said, take care of your diet, take care of your sleep, hydrate, get sunlight, spend time with people. That's like one of the most important things. Is like a lot of people don't really touch on this, but the more time you spend with loved ones, the more time you spend with friends, it's going to energize you. Even if you're an introvert, like having a social circle around you, we're creatures of, we love to socialize. There is no way that you can get by without talking to anybody. Again, like I'm going to compare this to someone that's depressed or someone that's just so introverted they never leave the house. Like they're not going to get as much done. Like it cracks me up whenever entrepreneurs talk about locking themselves in a closet with no distractions, no sunlight, nothing. They don't go out. They go into these like I forgot what they were called, but like monk mode seasons. Like there's some validity in that, but it's just short term. Like you're not going to be in monk mode for a year. You're not going to be in monk mode for 10 years. Like the whole point of business is, yes, like have seasons where you work, but again, you want to grow holistically. You don't want to just like sacrifice everything else just to focus on one thing. So that's the biggest thing, is just optimize for your energy, build your energy reserves up. And one of the misconceptions people have is that I don't have the energy. So let's say you want to, you should work out. It's like, I don't have the energy for that. That's not how it works. So your body creates as much energy as it needs to get by. So you might have conditioned yourself to operate at a certain energy level where you can't even fathom going higher, or it doesn't drop down any below because you've built such a routine where you already know what you need for the day. Your body adapts. That is the whole point of it. What you need to do and what you need to realize is that energy grows once you start pushing the boundaries. It's just like anything else. That's how learning happens too, is that you have to start pushing the boundaries for your body to get pushed outside the zone. When you think about flow, it needs to be challenging enough, but still within your wheelhouse for you to get into flow. Again, energy is the same. As soon as you start pushing those energy reserves up, you start diving into flow. And what happens is that now your capacity starts to grow. It's like going to the gym. You're not going to lift like, 25 pounds or bench press like 100 pounds and then expect that you're going to grow muscles. Like, no, there has to be progressive overload. Same thing with energy. You have to progressively overload yourself to grow your energy reserves. And that's how you get more done in less time. So that's the first lesson, is that energy is a lot more important than time. The second lesson is that most people operate on the wrong definition of wealth. So people think that wealth is all about money. when you talk about, or when you ask them what kind of assets do you have, or how much wealth do you have, they're going to start touching on their net worth. They're going to start touching on, like the houses that they have, or the businesses that they own, or like maybe the stock market, like their what they actually are invested in. That's not wealth. Like that's only a small piece of the puzzle. Wealth, what it really is it's time, relationships, health, and your resources. Money, which fits into resources, but again, it's such a small piece of it. So how do you spend your time? What are the relationships that are around you? What is the current state of your health? And what resources do you have? If you picture a quadrant, there's 4 different pieces to it. And then if you zoom in on the resources aspect of it, that's 25% of the pie. But money is still a tiny sliver of that, because with wealth and resources, again, there's businesses, investments, there's all these different things. There's the quote assets. And the way to define assets is that it's the lessons that you've learned, it's the loyalty of other people, and it's the memories of what you're going through. So basically, it's anything that people cannot take away from you. So yes, while business and real estate is technically an asset, what a real asset is everything that's internal that you carry with you. Because as soon as your physical assets are stripped away, you still have all the internal assets. Again, the lessons that you learned, the relationships and the loyalties that are around you, and then the memories of what you're going through. That's going to stick with you, and that's what allows you to grow even if you lose everything. So that's kind of the real definition of wealth. And again, to add an extra sort of caveat to wealth is that it's income that's not motivated it's when income is not a motivator of action. So that is a big thing. That's when you're truly free, is that you get to do things because you want to, not because it's going to get you paid. And it's very hard to delineate that because, again, I come from an immigrant family, and I saw my parents work hard. I saw them put in the hours. My dad worked 2 jobs just to kind of provide for us and give us a life. But that got ingrained in me that, you had to pull these long days. You had to do all this sort of stuff to basically pay the bills, because how do you get by in life without paying the bills? But like, that's how a lot of people sort of run into these issues when they grind to the bone to scale their businesses. They get super rich, but they're still miserable because they're not actually wealthy. There is no wealth built up. They sacrificed everything just to get money, which is maybe like, 5% of the pie that we just talked about, where there's relationships, time, health, and resources. So again, be careful with how you operate in wealth. Like, you might say that you want to be wealthy, but if you look at your calendar, you're not actually optimizing it because it might just be fully decked out with you just grinding to the bone, trying to scale your business. But when you try to account for things like gym time, maybe meditations, or maybe just spending time with friends or your significant other, and it's not on there, you're not actually optimizing for wealth. You're just optimizing to be rich, which is not directly contributed to actually growing wealth. So that was the most interesting thing that we touched on. Again, when you consider the fact that there's entrepreneurs that are making millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, and we talked about how wealth isn't just about money. Like, it shows what the real thing is. Like, when you get to the top, all of those preconceived notions that you had about money start to kind of break down. And I'm lucky enough to have sat in that room and learned this lesson early. And it's now what I'm trying to adapt now into my life. I mean, it helps that we're traveling full time in Nashville right now, but still, like, this has been kind of what I've been thinking about for a while now, is that what is the point of building everything up if you're going to grind everything to the bone, sacrifice everything? Like, what is that money for? You got no one to share it with. You got no experiences except all the grind that you put in that's borderline traumatizing for you. So it's like, where's the fun in that? There's no fun in, like, at that point, you might as well just work a full-time job. You're going to be miserable in both, so you might as well work a full-time job where you have dedicated hours and you actually have some kind of free time at the end. So that's just my perspective, but that's lesson number 2, is that most people operate on the wrong definition of wealth, and that wealth is when income is not the motivator of action, and also wealth is the time that you spend, the relationships that you have around you, the health, the current state of your health, and then the resources that you have. Lesson number 3 is that most people are actually governed by scarcity. And it makes sense, when you think about evolutionarily, we've all been programmed to kind of think for tomorrow. Hunter-gatherers, you only hunted for the food that you needed today. Then tomorrow you repeat. There was never a sense of abundance. And you've probably heard this where, you walk into a grocery store, you have all these choices in the world. It's like, we're not actually trained like that. And what scarcity actually means is, we have to actually define these terms, is that scarcity is when you add up everything that you want and it's still less than what you have or what there is. That definition, again, kind of crushed me, because if you're a business owner, if you're an entrepreneur, you know this already, is that you aim for these financial targets. And then as soon as you hit the target, it's like, okay, the next level is going to make me happier, or the next level is going to make me more fulfilled. Again, so when you add everything up together, it's still never enough. That's how you operate in scarcity. And most people are operating in that. Doesn't matter whether you're an entrepreneur or like a W-2 employee, you're operated by that. The most interesting is, though, is that most advice is actually rooted from scarcity too, because when you think about it, 7% of the US population is self-employed, which means 93% is employed. So that means 93% of the advice that you hear out there is optimized for the employed people, which are people that are typically a little bit more rooted in scarcity. I'm not saying that every one of them is. Again, us entrepreneurs, we're very much victim to this too. But if you talk to an entrepreneur and you talk to someone that's working a job, the entrepreneur typically, ideally, is someone that's building something that they do not want to escape. They never want to stop working, so they're not really optimizing for retirement. And two, when they talk, they usually talk in timelines of 5, 10, 15, if not 50 to 100 years down the line. Whereas a regular employee, typically, again, not everybody, but typically will talk about how they're just working to pay the bills, they're working to retire, and they might just be thinking a couple months out, if not a year out. They're not really thinking that long term out. Again, this is the core difference, and you have to be careful who you take advice from, because again, most advice is rooted from scarcity, and most advice isn't actually meant for us entrepreneurs. I learned this the hard way when, I used to, growing up as a teenager, I'd watch all these personal finance gurus on YouTube, and then became an entrepreneur, and all the advice that I learned from these personal finance gurus didn't really apply, because it's meant for people that are working jobs where you get to retire early, all that sort of stuff. But again, as an entrepreneur, that's not the goal. That's not what you're optimizing for. So be careful what advice you take. And the solution to this, again, is to stretch out the timeline. So like I referenced before, entrepreneurs are typically thinking 5, 10, 50, 100 years down the line. That's how you can operate as well, is that to get out of scarcity, to get out of that short-term thinking, stretch the timelines, because you probably already have, a 1-year goal, a 3-year goal, a 5-year goal, if not maybe a 10-year goal. And you might have financial targets for all of those years. But when you start stretching things out to 50 years, to 100 years, you probably don't have financial goals tied to that at all, because it's based on something that's bigger, that's better than just money. And there's a recurring theme here that money is just not everything. And again, when you get to the top, you sort of realize this. Again, I'm fortunate to have learned this lesson before I've sort of gotten to the top. And now I'm just trying to share this with you as well, is that you can understand this, because intelligence is, yes, like the rate of learning, but you got to be able to learn from other people through osmosis. If you're just learning the lessons yourselves, it's going to take a lot longer to actually let those lessons sink in. So true wisdom is actually learning from other people's experiences. So just keep that in mind. Stretch out your timeline, because the longer you have, the more confidence you have in actually hitting your targets. If again, let's say you want to build an 8-figure business, a $10 million a year business, it's a lot harder to do that in 3 years than it is 50 years. So if you stretch out to 50 years, you have the confidence, you have the maybe not the know-how, but you have the sort of confidence to know that you can do it. And the path that you're going to take is going to be a little bit different if it's 50 years versus 3. So give yourself some grace, stretch out your timelines, realize that there's really not big of a rush, which goes against a lot of the sort of talk about like, oh, you're going to die soon and all that sort of stuff. But but again, going back to wealth is like, are you going to really sacrifice the short amount of time that you have, which is one aspect of wealth, to build up money, which is a much smaller aspect of wealth, and sacrifice everything else? Like, doesn't seem like a life worth living. Like a billionaire that's missing out on their child's youthful years, they're not wealthy. Someone that's grinding to the bone and they end up in a divorce, that's not wealthy. Like, who do you actually want to follow? Someone that has a little bit less financial income or less financial wealth, but is much happier in the relationships, has all the free time in the world, and is actually able to, has like health, they look good, they feel good, and they interact well instead of looking like they're exhausted and never sleeping enough. Like, who do you actually want to follow? Who do you want to model? So that's the big thing here, is just be careful who you take advice from, because most people are governed by scarcity. And scarcity just means that when you add up everything that you want, it's always going to be less than what there is or what you have. And then the last lesson here, and I touched on this in the intro, but it's optimize for principles first, strategy second, and then tactics third. So if we start with tactics, then you're programmed completely incorrectly. And during the event, they told the story of, I forgot what it's called. It's basically a story about a turkey, For 700 days, the turkey is fed by the farmer every single day, fed very generously. There's no holding back. The farmer comes in at the same time every single day, feeds the turkey, leaves, and does that multiple times. Over like a certain period of days, months, weeks, or even years, the turkey is now programmed. It's like, oh, this is good. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing because the farmer loves me. The farmer keeps coming and feeds me. So the turkey is happy 700 days of the year. But there is one day that everything breaks down, and that's Thanksgiving Day, when the turkey gets slaughtered. That's the problem with tactics, is you can latch onto a tactic that might seem like it works temporarily, but then all of a sudden it stops working. So what do? That's your Thanksgiving Day. That's the slaughterhouse right there. You have nothing to fall back on. But when you start with principles, which are basically like rules that have been created over centuries, if not millennia, that stay true throughout the entirety of time, then when tactics fail, you can just go back to principles and rework the strategy, rework the tactics. But it always goes back to principles. It is sort of the base of every single thing that works. One of the biggest principles that most of the online space has forgotten is under promise, over deliver. Right now, every time I scroll on Instagram, it just seems like it's the complete opposite. It's over promise and then under deliver. Everyone is so jaded and skeptical. And that's the problem with our space right now, is that we're so focused on the strategies and tactics and we've completely forgot about the principles. So we're diverting the wrong way. But again, there's now like the pendulum is going to eventually swing back, where there's going to be principle driven entrepreneurs that bring this focus back. Eventually people are going to get tired of getting scammed and ripped off, that the principle driven entrepreneurs are going to basically take all of the market share from the people that think that tactics and strategies are the way to go. No, again, these principle driven entrepreneurs are going to last much longer because principles don't change. They're the same thing every time. And they're the ones that are in control of the strategies and tactics because they know why it works and when it works. Whereas the people that are focused on tactics and strategies, they don't understand principles. They just hop from trend to trend because that's just what's working right now. So that's the last lesson, the fourth lesson, which is optimize for principles first, strategy second, and then tactics third. So hopefully this was helpful. This was one of the most transformational events for me. It's been crazy to experience that sort of level of camaraderie inside of the room. And also, this is the most sort of out of place that I felt inside of a room, but also I felt like I belonged there because I felt heard. And it was one of the first times that being in a room full of coaches, consultants, marketers, that I've heard stuff like this being talked about. A lot of the times it's just all about grinding, scaling businesses, buying all these material things, but this was not it. So again, hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully this was as transformational for you as it was me. And at the very least, just take one of these lessons and just start applying it to your life. And I'll see you in the next video.